You do not just think more than most people. You feel more. And not in the way people mean when they call someone sensitive, in a deeper, quieter, more specific way that you have probably never heard described accurately by anyone. You have sat in a room full of people having a perfectly normal conversation and felt something that nobody else in that room seemed to feel. A heaviness, an undercurrent, an emotional texture to the moment that was real and specific and completely invisible to everyone around you. And because nobody else acknowledged it, you probably did what you always do. You filed it away, said nothing, and wondered quietly whether you simply experienced the world differently from other people. You do. And there is a precise neurological reason why. Most people spend their lives on the surface of their emotional experience. Something happens, they feel a response, they move on. The feeling is real, but it does not linger, does not deepen, does not connect itself to everything else they have ever felt. For you, that is not how it works. For you, a single moment can open into an entire interior landscape, pulling in memories, implications, half-formed fears, old feelings you thought you had finished with. What takes most people 30 seconds to process takes you 3 days. And you have probably been told at some point that this is a problem. It is not a problem. It is a consequence of something specific about how your brain is built. And understanding that changes everything. But before we get into exactly what is happening neurologically, there is one emotion you feel that most people around you literally cannot access at the same depth. Not sadness. Not anxiety. Something far more nuanced than either of those. Something that arrives in quiet moments, usually alone, that feels like grief and beauty and longing all at once, for something you cannot quite name. We will get to that emotion precisely. And when I describe it, you will feel immediately and completely recognized in a way that does not happen often. First, here is what is actually happening inside you during an ordinary moment that everyone else moves through without a second thought. Your brain has a network, the default mode network, that most people's brains run at a moderate level. Yours runs significantly higher. It is more active, makes more connections, generates more internal thought, and most importantly, it is the same network responsible for emotional depth, empathetic feeling, and the kind of self-referential thinking that asks, what does this moment actually mean? Here is what that means in real terms. When something happens to you, even something small, even something most people would barely register, your brain does not just note it and move on. Connects it to everything related, to everything it resembles, to everything it might mean about you, about your life, about the people involved. The experience gets processed at a depth that produces emotional texture most people simply never encounter. This is why you can feel genuinely moved by something nobody else in the room reacted to. Why a piece of music can stop you completely while others just nod along. Why a passing comment from someone can sit with you for days while the person who said it forgot it within the hour. You are not overreacting. You are processing at full depth. And most people around you are not. Have you ever tried to explain to someone why you are still thinking about something that happened 3 days ago, and watched their face cycle through polite confusion into something that looked uncomfortably close to pity? That moment, that specific experience of trying to share the weight of something and having the other person simply not find it heavy. That is not a communication failure. That is the gap between two genuinely different depths of emotional processing, making itself visible. And that gap follows you everywhere. It shows up when you feel inexplicably sad after something good ends. Not because you are ungrateful, but because you felt the experience so completely that its absence creates a real and specific loss. It shows up when you cannot shake a conversation that everyone else has already forgotten. When you feel the emotional atmosphere of a room the moment you walk into it, before a single word has been exchanged. When someone says they are fine and with a certainty you cannot justify logically, that they are not. This is not intuition in the mystical sense. It is your default mode network running its connections at full capacity, picking up signals that other people's less active processing simply does not register. You are not reading minds. You are reading everything else, the microsignals, the emotional undercurrents, the gap between what is being said and what the full picture is communicating. And you are feeling the result of that reading, not just thinking it. Here is the strange part. This ability, this depth of emotional perception, comes with a cost that nobody prepares you for. Because feeling everything at full intensity is not always a gift. Sometimes it is an exposure. You feel other people's pain almost as though it belongs to you. You absorb the emotional residue of difficult interactions long after the interaction itself is over. You grieve things that most people never thought to grieve in the first place. And because the world is not designed for this level of sensitivity, you spend enormous energy managing an interior experience that has no obvious outlet and no easy explanation. Most people completely miss what this ongoing management actually costs. It is not dramatic. It does not look like struggle from the outside. It looks like you being quiet, like you being thoughtful, like you simply being you. But inside, you are continuously processing a volume of emotional information that most people around you are not even receiving. And that processing, sustained, automatic, impossible to pause, is exhausting in a way that is very difficult to communicate to someone who has never experienced it. And this leads directly to the emotion I mentioned at the beginning. The one that arrives in quiet moments. The one that feels like grief and beauty and longing simultaneously for something you cannot name. Psychologists call it by different terms. Some call it existential longing. Others describe it as hypernostalgia. But the most accurate description might simply be this. It is what happens when a mind that processes everything deeply turns its attention toward time itself. Toward the impermanence of moments. Toward the specific, irreplaceable texture of experiences that are already passing even as you are living them. You feel the ending of things before they end. And that particular ache, beautiful and heavy in equal measure, is something most people around you have simply never felt at that depth. That feeling I just described, the ache of an ending before it ends, the grief of a moment still happening, has probably visited you more times than you can count. At a dinner table with people you love, suddenly aware that this specific version of this moment will never exist again. Driving home from something good, feeling the loss of it before you have even arrived. Standing inside an ordinary Tuesday that your brain quietly flagged as something worth remembering, without being able to explain why. Most people have never felt that. Not because they are less capable of feeling, but because accessing it requires a depth of present-moment processing that their cognitive system simply does not run at. You feel it because your brain connects everything, the present moment to its own impermanence, the experience to its eventual absence, the joy to the specific quality of its fragility. And what that connection produces is an emotional experience so layered that it exists entirely outside the vocabulary of people who have never had it. This is why you have probably felt profoundly alone in rooms full of people who care about you. Not because the connection is not real, but because the depth at which you experience things creates a gap that genuine affection cannot always bridge. You are not asking for more love. You are asking for someone who feels the world at the same resolution you do. And those people are rare enough that finding one feels like an event. Here is what this means practically, and this is the part that matters most. The intensity you feel is not a disorder. It is not anxiety dressed up as depth. It is not something to be managed down to a more comfortable level so that your emotional life becomes easier for other people to be around. It is the direct output of a cognitive system that processes experience completely, and completely is not the same as excessively. But here is the part nobody tells you. The same depth that makes you feel beauty more intensely also makes you feel disappointment more precisely. Makes rejection land harder, makes uncertainty more destabilizing, makes the gap between how things are and how you sense they could be feel wider and more painful than it does for people whose processing never goes that deep. The gift and the cost are generated by the same source. You cannot have one without the other. And accepting that, genuinely accepting it, not as resignation but as understanding, is what changes the relationship you have with your own inner life. Because the exhaustion, the loneliness, the feeling of being perpetually slightly out of sync with a world that moves faster and feels less. None of that is evidence that something is wrong with you. It is evidence that you are running a more complete version of human experience than most people around you ever access. That completeness is uncomfortable. It is sometimes isolating. It asks more of you than you ask to give. But it also means that when you experience joy, you experience it at a depth most people never reach. When you love someone, you love them with a specificity and a fullness that is genuinely rare. When you are present in a moment, you are present in it completely, feeling its texture, its weight, its particular unrepeatable quality. You were not built for a shallow life. And no matter how many times the world has suggested otherwise, that has always been something to carry with quiet pride, not apologize for.